Good afternoon, and welcome to Broadband Breakfast Live Online for Wednesday, September 30th, 2020. I am very excited to introduce our next guest. This has actually been a long time in the planning and preparation to have Sunne Wright McPeak, who is the CEO of the California Emerging Technology Fund, and she'll be with us just momentarily. Before, I just want to kind of make sure you're all aware that we are here every Wednesday at 12 noon Eastern Time. We are going to have one more Champions of Broadband event next week on Wednesday, October 7th. And then we kick off a new series, Broadband Breakfast Live Online. It's called A No-Nonsense Guide to 5G. We're super excited about this. We'll be posting more about this later today on Broadband Breakfast, so come back often. We post stories every weekday at broadbandbreakfast.com about the intersection of broadband technology and internet policy. And so we encourage you to sign up for our YouTube channel, sign up for our email alert, and learn more about us. Okay, without any further ado, I'm going to open it up to our guest, Sunne McPeak. Thank you for joining us, Sunne. How are you this morning?
Drew, I am really delighted to be able to join you and want to thank you for your leadership in the whole space of broadband. You're a trailblazer with digital inclusion, and you also are very patient with the California Emerging Technology Fund. As I recall, you first issued this invitation on your birthday, July 15th. So a belated happy birthday, and now I've outed you. Everybody can send you cards next July. And everybody at the California Emerging Technology Fund is so excited that you're paying attention to what we're doing, because you have such a stellar career in this whole field of achieving digital equity.
Oh, it's so kind of you, Sunne. I didn't expect to get an introduction myself, so that's very kind of you. And it is true, our kind of paths have circled a little bit. I remember a brief introduction to you a couple of years back at a Shelby conference at which you spoke, and of course we chatted just briefly about some of our interactions over the Broadband Technology Opportunity Program earlier. But let's dive in and let our viewers from around the country, and we're again so excited that on 9 a.m. California time you've taken the time to be with us. Tell us, actually, first of all, if you don't mind, where are you and how are things in the environment where you're at right now, Sunne?
So thank you, Drew, for asking. The California scene right now is so frightening for so many folks. We happen to live in Alameda County in the East Bay of the San Francisco Bay Area. We have had 2 alerts from CAL FIRE to be ready to evacuate, but we are blessed that we have not had to do that. Our organization has an office in Los Angeles. We have our Northern California office. We have a person who is in the Inland Empire in Riverside, another that is in the Sacramento area, another in San Jose. So we have a very lean team, I must say, for a state that is 40 million people, trying to carry out the mission we were given by the California Public Utilities Commission. So that's where we are. The team is spread out. We're virtual. And thank you for caring about our California residents.
Well, and California, as you rightly point out, is a huge state, 40 million people, much larger than many countries. You have, and you are responsible for, a very unique entity there, the California Emerging Technology Fund. What is CTF? How did it come to be? And tell us some of the challenges you're doing and the progress you're making.
Thank you, Drew. And you pointed it out. We're a very unique animal in the organization world that was actually directed to be established by the California Public Utilities Commission in 2005. And we say it that way because it also is somewhat unique to California that our regulatory entity that oversees public utilities have this vision that there was a need for a nonprofit statewide entity to work in partnership with both the public sector and the private sector to close the digital divide. At the time, in 2005, SBC was buying AT&T. They kept the name AT&T. And Verizon was buying MCI. As they went through the proceeding before the California Public Utilities Commission for the transfer of licenses, which is really what a Public Utilities Commission is looking at. In California, there must be a finding of public benefit if there is a merger or an acquisition. And that at that point in time, the California Public Utilities Commission, led by President Michael Peavy, with Commissioner Susan Kennedy, they came up with this idea of the California Emerging Technology Fund. They chose that name. They put that name into the order. At the time, I must confess, I was working for the state of California as Secretary of Business, Transportation, and Housing. Although I had taken that job as a champion of broadband, had said to Governor Schwarzenegger when he was interviewing me for the position, on one page, here's how you jumpstart the California economy, because we had a deficit that was about $15 billion in the state coffers at the time. And I had one of the lines for infrastructure was accelerate the deployment of broadband to compete globally. So we were very much in that column, but I wasn't paying attention to what the PUC was doing. That order of the California Public Utilities Commission literally spelled out exactly how the first 12 directors of a board would be constituted. That board was in place and they came and recruited me. So that's how we got started. The team of CETF is literally 13 people throughout the state. We do have a working capital from that first order of the PUC that was not insignificant. The negotiated voluntary agreement, although I think CEO of SBC at the time, Ed Whitaker, did not exactly think it was voluntary, put $60 million into the capitalization of CETF. As I often have said, and my colleagues have heard me many times remark, to this farm girl, $60 million is a hell of a lot of money, but California is a big damn state. And so literally, we had a directive in from the PUC that said, here's the seed capital, go close the digital divide. And by the way, of the 60 million, put 5 million into telehealth, which is what we did. And you remarked how large California is. Just to put this in context, because then you got recruited to the state of Illinois to be the state director when a president was elected who could spell broadband. And and Rahm Emanuel, as first chief of staff, would go on TV and talk about broadband as an important part of the economic recovery. There was the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act that included dollars for states to do their planning, included dollars for both deployment. And in this world of broadband, we talk about the supply and demand side. The supply infrastructure side we refer to generally as deployment. On the demand side, we refer to that as adoption, people actually using the technology. Both are needed. They're inextricably related to one another. And so we began to do the planning when CETF was stood up. And here's what I wanted to tell you.
Can I just jump in, Sunne? Let me just make sure I understand, because again, we're dealing with something that is unique and
Right.
not quite. I mean, there are other states that do have broadband agencies, like Maine has Connect Me, and there are some others that are kind of continuing entities beyond an entity for a particular federal purpose. And CTF certainly fits that bill. Could you address two questions? One is, how do you interact with, if at all, the PUC after the Public Utility Commission in California, now that you've been kind of directed to be established? And secondly, do you have an ongoing source of income that comes into CETF to help you in the projects and ambitions you have?
Thank you very much. So in terms of interacting with the California Public Utilities Commission, we are required by state law, even though we are a nonprofit, a 501c3 designated by the IRS, we are required by statute to report to the legislature annually through the California Public Utilities Commission. That is their one responsibility in terms of oversight to CETF. They have no say on anything else we do, but we do report to them. We also appear before them. We are an advocate, oftentimes a legal party in the proceedings of mergers, acquisitions, corporate consolidations. And that leads me to say, when you ask, do we have ongoing funding? The original seed capital was what we expected to spend down. We actually earned about $5 million on that, $60 million. We got $14.3 million in additional grants, the BTOP grants for broadband adoption. We had other funds that came in, other smaller grants. In fact, we also had funding from internet service providers to do the first mapping for California's work on infrastructure availability. It was done under the aegis of the governor's broadband task force. Governor Schwarzenegger worked very closely with the legislature in a bipartisan effort to have a task force that was staffed by our good friend Ann Neville Bonilla and Michael Lang. It's a small world in terms of what we do. And so we thought we would go out of business. But here's why we didn't. We set very, very big goals in the first decade, the decade we expected to be in business. We would get to 98% deployment in California. That is, 98% of all households would have access to high-speed internet infrastructure, and we'd get to 80% adoption. That is, 80% of all households would be online, voluntarily want to be online. And about halfway through that decade, it became clear we were not going to make that happen without a game changer. And that game changer ended up being we had to be both in the legislative arena and the regulatory arena. And in the regulatory arena, we figured out that the internet service providers paid more attention to what we had to say if we were a legal party when they were buying one another. And so we have had a series of settlements with those internet service providers where the primary commitment is funding of their deployment into unserved areas, not through CETF. Their commitments to sign up households that are low income for their affordable offers. But in two of them, we do have a revenue stream that comes to CETF to manage grant dollars that also flow through CETF. So that is how we continue to operate, plus grants. Today, for example, Drew, the city of San Jose that has been on the forefront as a smart city, incredible vision for a city that is 1 million people in the heart of Silicon Valley. They are the capital of Silicon Valley. They've got 100,000 people who aren't connected. Believe it or not, 50,000 households in the heart of the Silicon Valley and the city of San Jose are not online. They were very visionary, led by Mayor Sam Liccardo, but unanimous support from the 10 council members to put out RFPs on 5G deployment. They have arrangements with 3 companies for 5G deployment. Those companies are paying a very reasonable amount per small cell installation. Will generate about $24 million over 10 years for that deployment. And they are taking 60% of that revenue from the fees paid by the ISPs to put back into digital inclusion grants. CETF has been engaged by the city to manage those dollars for San Jose. So that's another way in which we are supported.
Great. So let's talk a little bit about that. You helpfully divided up the world into the deployment and the adoption. And as we know, those of us who have been in this, you referenced the Broadband Technology Opportunity Program, which of course had a component of funding infrastructure, putting a large chunk of money into building out fiber middle mile and also some last mile. And then there was a component on adoption and use. They also had a public computing center segment. And of course, there was broadband mapping and deployment, which was the core work of the Partnership for Connected Illinois. And I think got its inspiration from what you all were doing in California there. So talk about the deployment and the adoption side. And you've sort of referred to the adoption side and some of CTF's programs to manage digital divide programs. Let's talk about both of those. Do you have any, quote, infrastructure projects, or do you fund infrastructure deployment projects, or is it primarily on the deployment, or let just speak both about that. What's CTF's role in the deployment and your role in the adoption digital divide programs? So
thank you. And that is how we look at our tasks, our work in the world of adoption, which is getting people online, but also the infrastructure is necessary but not sufficient. So when we looked at California in 2007 and 8 and did the initial mapping, that was the forerunner to the ARA state program.
Yes.
What we found, which was the data, the 477 data from the industry, who actually submitted it to a third-party aggregator that we had engaged. We didn't see the data, but we worked with the companies on what would be the size of the cell, if you will, that would be represented in the data. We did more discussion of GIS mapping than I ever wanted to be introduced to or subjected to. Having said that, what we found, which was really important, is that the area that was totally unconnected in California, which was about 6% of our residences, were spread out, however, over 44,000 square miles. So we were unconnected in 44,000 square miles. That happens to be the size of the state of Kentucky. And to recognize a state and a governor that was ahead of the curve, Connect Kentucky was ahead of California in doing work. The governor had negotiated a settlement with the tobacco companies, I think, and had a very nice pot of money with a vision that in a state that has a lot of rural area, you have to get everybody connected. So we started with that notion of we have 44,000 square miles unconnected. Again, our Public Utilities Commission decided to take a telephone subsidy fund called the High Cost B Fund. It was for the large telcos, and do consumer relief and capture a part of what was being collected for broadband. And they established the California Advanced Services Fund. If you work with Shelby and John, you work also with former FCC Commissioner, former CPUC Commissioner Rochelle Chong. So Rochelle was then on the California Public Utilities Commission. It was her brainchild to do the California Advanced Services Fund. In full disclosure, Rochelle is our special counsel in all of these corporate consolidations. So I want to acknowledge everybody who actually does all the work here. And we supported the California Advanced Services Fund over the last decade. CETF has been we've been the sponsor of the legislation to continue to get more dollars into CASF. Then what we have done is work with the PUC on the rules and the regulations for implementing them. And then we turn around and we work with all of the regional consortia, because California being such a big state, part of what we knew from the beginning is we had to have regional leadership structures to work through. And those regional consortia that we talk about that are very representative of the stakeholders in their region, their job is to find the internet service providers, help them apply for the CASF dollars. It's herding the cats. And that's what we do. We cause all that to happen, Drew. And on top of that, we work with the state agencies to try to streamline permitting, getting a permit, et cetera, to be able to build.
Now, this is great. This is a great model, right? And so just to be clear, these regions, I don't know if they have an existence kind of separate apart from this work they do. So how many regions are there in that Kentucky-sized area? And is there an ongoing way that they, I mean, are they basically putting out RFPs? I mean, what's the actual way the deployments are getting built there?
So there are about 16 regional consortia in California, and there are rural and urban. So for the rural area of the 44,000 square miles, which are also spread out throughout California, there are about 7 of those regional consortia that are really focused on rural California. The role they have is very similar to the California Emerging Technology Fund, which is bringing together, convening all the stakeholders, and helping the ISPs prepare their applications for the California Advanced Services Fund that is administered by the PUC. So in California, it is our California Public Utilities Commission that administers the infrastructure grants. They are the ones who take the applications and approve subsidies for deployment.
Okay. So the PUC, and so CETF's role on the deployment side?
It is, it's back to working with all the regional consortia. As an example, we have just gone through with 7 of them working on what we call a preferred scenario. If they had to plan for connecting all of their region, just as you had to do so in Illinois, that you worked in Utah with Utopia on, if they had to do that work, where would they tap into existing infrastructure, albeit often it is owned by the private internet service providers, but then there's public rights of way. There are public lands that can be used for shared installation. Mm-hmm. There is a whole set of public agencies, 2025 in every region that has to sign off on encroachment permits. And I use the word herding cats because I grew up on a small dairy farm. And I learned early on, because you always have cats to keep down the mice in the grain for, feeding the cattle. And it's so much easier to herd the cats if you put out the milk. So you put out a little bit of money. We like to talk about carrots and sticks, and I'm in the column of I want carrots big enough to be sticks. So that everybody wants to come to the table. They want to be a part of a solution. And it's that leadership role, that catalyst role. We even use the word, we're a catalyst in causing things to happen. On the adoption side, we do much more direct work. And remember,
so let's talk about that. Let's dive into that because clearly that's a core function of CETF, and you've sort of described how you kind of got into this, and that recognition in 2010 or around there that you weren't going to be able to get without really focusing on adoption. So talk about the significance of adoption as you veer in towards the actual programs that you've been doing and that you're proud of.
Well, keep in mind that the infrastructure is necessary but not sufficient, and technology is just a tool. It's a powerful tool. It can be an empowering tool, but it is just a tool. It's what difference does it make in our lives? Well, actually, being simple-minded, I will say it saves us time and money. And guess who has the least time and the least money? It's actually low-income households. And so technology is more transforming for low-income households than even for the rest of us. And most of us couldn't figure out how to get along in any given day if we weren't connected to the internet. That's how you and I are talking, right? And so when we did the analysis, and we sponsor a statewide survey on broadband adoption. It's conducted these days by UC Berkeley Institute of Government Studies. So we always have a third party that is doing the actual surveying for the integrity of the data. But that is now used as probably the most reliable metric for where are we. And in 2008, where California was at 55% adoption, which was the national average. That's exactly what the Pew Charitable Trust had for the adoption. And we said we're going to get to 80%. Well, in a decade, we got to 88%. And we were, always tracking, however, the functionality of the connection, because there are unconnected folks and there are underconnected folks. And our definition of underconnected is you have only a smartphone. And we love our smartphones. We can go anywhere with them, and we can do a lot of navigation of the internet. It's a little hard to do a call as we're doing right now on StreamYard. It's a little hard to do homework if you're a student trying to do composition or graphics. And so we have to look at the functionality from the point of view of the consumer. But back in 2008, when we did the first statewide survey, we were pretty sobered because in Los Angeles County, which is 10 million people, it's 40% of 25% of California is 40 million folks. They had connections by only 48% of their households. More than half of the households in Los Angeles County were not connected. In fact, if we took all of the unconnected households, which were 13 million people, that population would have been the 5th largest state in the nation. It would have exceeded the population in your state of Illinois. And so we went about systematically looking at what gives relevance to someone to use the technology, particularly those who are not online. And to quote John Horrigan's analysis of the barriers to low-income households adopting, there are 3 things. It's cost, first and foremost. Second, it's relevance. And third, it is digital literacy. All 3 of those barriers have to be tackled for a household that's not online to say yes and to sign up for an affordable subscription. Therefore, we work with a lot of community-based organizations, a network of CBOs, also public agencies, particularly in schools. We have a great program called School to Home that transforms schools, not just gets technology into the schools, but closes the achievement gap as well as the digital divide. We work with CBOs on digital literacy training. Folks come in and take classes, but then those CBOs also work with those households to get them to sign up for the affordable offers that we negotiated with the companies when they were doing corporate consolidations.
Yeah, so let's actually take each of those 3 elements that John Horrigan, of course, whom we've both interacted with, and he's definitely the data guy on this question of broadband adoption. And
I hope he remembers that we just mentioned his name and called him.
Yes, we'll send him a link to this discussion. So cost, relevance, and digital literacy. So you just referred quickly to cost, right, and negotiating deals. Could you speak about each of these? Cost, what do you do to help on relevance? What do you do to help on digital literacy? It sounds like a lot of partnerships with the community-based organizations, right? They're doing a lot of that. And I should mention, Sunne, this is something that we at Broadband Illinois, when we were the state broadband initiative entity, we certainly had the mapping role and we had a coordinating role in the deployments of fiber and wireless, but we also had a digital literacy role and played a small role in the FCC's first pilot on Broadband Lifeline, right? Which is to say how you use the Lifeline program for broadband in those days. So I would love your thoughts on each of these 3 points and how CETF plays a role in helping overcome those hurdles.
On the cost issue, we have done a lot of interviewing and focus groups and assistance to low-income households. So we have firsthand information. We probably talk to more low-income folks, not in English, people who have never been online, people who've never had a computer. And what we hear from them when they understand the value proposition, which is something that has to be conveyed in language and in culture, which is important. The CBOs, community-based organizations, are the trusted messengers, the honest brokers. But what low-income households will tell us is they will value and prioritize $10, $15, $20 a month. And so it's that range of affordability that we have negotiated with the internet service providers for their own particular brand of an affordable offer. And granted, they're not all aligned. There's a lot of variation from what AT&T has for their access program to what Charter has for their Spectrum Assist, to what Comcast pioneered for Internet Essentials. Cox has Connect to Compete. Frontier has Frontier Fundamentals. All of the large companies except Verizon actually have an affordable offer. They've often been forced to do that in the proceedings, the legal regulatory proceedings. Having said that, that's not good enough for really, really low income folks. There needs to be a lifeline program.
Mm-hmm.
All of us worked hard, including Shelby and John and you, on the FCC Broadband Lifeline program that today can best be described as being on life support, hardly not being used at all. And we also need that in the state of California. So our senior vice president, Susan Walters, and Rochelle Chong are very active in getting to a state lifeline program that can be the, if you will, the underpinning, the backup and back drop for what the affordable offers are from the ISPs. I want to hasten to say that there is yet another category of people who just need internet in their home, and those are the residents in publicly subsidized housing. So what HUD provides housing subsidies for, there's low income tax credits, federal and state in California. By definition, those residents who qualify for publicly subsidized housing are the most impoverished. What we don't want is that the next generation of residents are the kids living there today. And that's likely to happen if we can't get through the cycle of poverty. And part of that, as a tool, is getting everyone online at home.
Uh-huh. What is CETF's current goal for adoption? I mean, do you have one, and how do you track progress for this goal that you've set?
Our goal for 2022 is 90% adoption statewide. We are advocating that the state not only recognize and embrace it, but also then set a goal of 95% by 2025. And so we, one of the things we do that causes action is we go to policymakers, elected officials, members of the governor's administration, the regulators, and say, we've got to set a goal, because if we don't have a goal, we're not going to get to it, right? And so that's how we drive our own work, is against this goal, and the measurement of it is our statewide broadband adoption survey.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So we've been talking for a half an hour now about this problem of the digital divide without using that word yet that I can remember. So talk about language and words and the importance of it. One difference over the years is that there used to be a debate about is there or is there not a digital divide, and now you don't really hear that there is a debate that there is a digital divide. And another component of this, Sunne, is it's migrated from being a term that used to be sort of thought of as poor, low income, to a term about rural, right? Rural versus urban. So those are just some thoughts, but I wanted to get your thoughts on some of the kind of messaging and wordsmithing. What is your view about how we talk about this problem?
You know, the question you just asked, Drew, is so reflective of your insight. So thank you. There definitely has been an evolution around the conversation when, for example, the California Public Utilities Commission talked about establishing the California Emerging Technology Fund. The term was digital divide, but the verb was bridge the digital divide. Our board very explicitly said, no, that's not good enough. We're going to close the digital divide. So implying, and we truly intended, our goal is to get everyone online who wants to be online. And by our own survey, literally less than 1% of the population today says they don't want to be online. They tend to be over the age of 75. And what changes their mind about wanting to be online is when they understand they can stay in their home with telehealth and not have to go into a facility. So, you know, it's just amazing when you look at, people do want to be online. A lot of people also want to be able to unplug, and they understand the need to do that. But just in terms of basic public safety, access to jobs, being able to apply for a job, for school, for financial aid for school, connect to families somewhere else in the country. All of our Native Americans in California, we have 109 federally recognized tribes in California. They look to having the internet connectivity to preserve their culture and language, because most of their residents actually don't live on the reservations, on the tribal lands. They live in urban areas. And so in terms of the terminology, we talked about closing the digital divide. And we did great work for a decade plus, almost 13 years. And in March of this year, there were national and state and local shelter-in-place orders for COVID-19. That pandemic exposed not just the digital divide, but exposed what we call a digital cliff. We have families falling off into deeper poverty, greater isolation. It is clear, and I think a recognition coming out of this tragedy of the pandemic that we've got truly digital haves and have-nots. Those of us who thought we were digital haves realized that the networks weren't designed for, in our state, 6.2 million K-12 kids, plus 300,000 teachers, plus 4 million people using higher education services, plus 7 million adults working from home, and then everybody trying to see their doctor online. Yeah. That simultaneous demand all day long has exposed that digital cliff and the need for, we have to have a fiber network, just absolutely no two ways about it. Fiber middle mile backhaul to the fiber backbone. We need to have, as a performance standard, a dynamic definition of what is adequate broadband. I should have said up front, we use the term broadband as a generic term for high-speed internet infrastructure, wireline, wireless. We've got to always view the technology from the point of view of the consumer, the customer. The speeds that are needed at home in order to do distance learning, to do telehealth, which should be those applications that actually drive policy about investment in infrastructure, policy about requirements for what companies offer at the home point of access, has to be related to those services. And so we've now come to talk about not just digital inclusion, but our goal is digital equity. And we say digital equity is a 21st century civil right, and access delayed is access denied. And so we are totally in the column of, this has to be recognized as not just an essential utility, but an absolute right if we're going to treat everyone in a way that they get an equal opportunity in this world.
Now, Sunne, you've mentioned so many things that I want to comment on. The first is your mention of the date, March 13th, right? That's the day kind of like the pandemic became real, hitting. This is going to be a long haul. It's a pandemic, according to the World Health Organization, a day or two before that. March 13th is the day we actually started Broadband Breakfast Live Online. We started this program because we saw the need to connect people in a time of COVID-19. And we have talked at length about telehealth, teleeducation, digital divide, the capacity and the health of the networks. And you've talked here about this very important point about the upstream capacity, right? And the FCC continues to have this antiquated definition of 25 megabits down, 3 megabits up is broadband in the FCC's mind. Of course, that's risen in the past. It used to be 200 kilobits, and then it was raised. Now it's 25. I would propose something like 100 up, 100 down. And the way of doing that is basically, here I'm going to throw out an idea, Sunne, that I'd like to get your support for, is we start measuring the quality of broadband by the upstream multiplied by the downstream. So instead of having 25.3, we'd have 75 point broadband, 25 times 3. Instead of 100 up, 100 down, we'd have 10,000, because the upstream is what makes the difference. The upstream is what enables people to communicate. You mentioned the schooling, right? I have now 6 classes going simultaneously at my home, one for each of the children and of course myself, who are connected to school through an upstream and a downstream connection. And so it's very important that we start talking about upstream speeds and measuring the things we need. And so let me just kind of pause to get your reaction to this point about focusing on it, because in some ways, I recognize 10, 100 up, 100 down is not going to be instantly achievable. So you want to have kind of benchmarks and let's call them maybe easier to reach goals. But at the same time, we can't give up on making sure our infrastructure is world class. And so I wonder again how that ties into what you do on either the deployment side or the adoption side.
I think it's really important what you said, and I want to recognize that there's always a very fertile, leasty kind of policy debate in California, and we've had pioneers that have existed and been forerunners to the California Emerging Technology Fund who like to remind me, well, they saw all this before, and I want to give some acknowledgement that there is an organization, for example, in California, which is very important to us, called CENIC, CENIC, that is the Corporation for Education Network Initiatives in California, a not-for-profit that started out doing the connections among the research institutions, research universities, now all higher education and libraries and K-12. And Louis Fox, who's the current CEO, is a great partner to CETF. Before that, Jim Delganis and Tom West had a vision of gigabit or bust. I mean, so they would remind me, they have been talking about high-speed internet infrastructure for a long time. And I think, all of that should be acknowledged, because nothing gets done without pioneers and a small group of people who decide to make something happen. And we at CETF want to always work with and support those kinds of trailblazers. Our Public Utilities Commission today, President Maribel Batcher, Commissioner Guzman Aceves, the rest of the commissioners are talking about 100 and 100. So we've got legislators who have talked about the speeds. Assemblymember Cecilia Aguiar-Curry and Senator Elena Gonzalez, Assemblymember Eduardo Garcia, Chairman of the committee in the Assembly, Miguel Santiago Ben Leso on the Senate side. Our Speaker, Anthony Rendon. These are the key leaders of our legislature. Pro Tem Tony Atkins, who have recognized the need for investment. And what we're having right now, it was sort of a shootout at the OK Corral at the last week of the legislature. I think everybody was operating from a point of principle that we need good legislation, good policy. We do need to set those best benchmarks. We are counseling policymakers that we need a dynamic definition, but absolute. If we're going to provide subsidies, it has to be for fiber middle mile. And then the speeds be what you've said. And I had not heard the concept of the multiplier, but thank you for sharing that, Drew. And as you've said, this pandemic and the need for two-way communication has actually shown we need more symmetrical systems, networks capable of being symmetrical, i.e. being able to deliver that upload speed as well as the download. I want to comment in this regard that we totally missed the boat. Going back a decade, we thought that there would be a natural gravitation to upload speeds needing to be higher. What we didn't anticipate is that Reed Hastings would be so successful in reinventing Netflix a couple of times that all of us would want to download movies, right? I mean, literally between Walmart and Netflix and now Amazon, we're downloading a lot more than we were uploading until we had to do distance learning and telehealth. But having said that, also, you know, it was instructive at the time that Tom Wheeler, as chair of the FCC, and his Federal Communications Commission adopted net neutrality. We used to say we actually, as an organization, didn't take a role in net neutrality. Personally, of course, I would want an open internet. We want open access in terms of the infrastructure that is subsidized. But it was a debate that was old generation of legacy telecom and new tech deciding who was going to have to invest in infrastructure so we could all download movies, except it wasn't all of us. It was only about 75% of us. And so back to terminology, going 4 or 5 years ago, we said we are as concerned about net equality as we are about net neutrality. And that is the kind of vision that has to come from a president. It has to come from Congress, has to be administered by the FCC, because no state can do it on their own, but every state should be a partner with a federal investment program.
Well, that is a great lead into a topic that we would love to talk about here. We've got about 14 minutes left. And I want to encourage all of those of you who are watching and participating. Certainly you have questions, go ahead and type them in or tweet them to Broadband Live, hashtag Broadband Live, and please share and like our videos so that others will know. This video is available on the platforms and also on Broadband Breakfast, and immediately after we conclude, it will be available as a replay. Now, so Sunne, what do you think the national approach should be in a new administration? Whoever emerges from what we are heading towards in November, what kind of federal policies do you see needing to come from Washington? You've had this great perspective and great perch, and we've talked a little bit of, and quite a bit actually, about the interrelationship of the Public Utility Commission and the California Advanced Services Fund and the role of CETF. Where, in your view, does and should the FCC, with its multiple billions of dollars every year, 8-9 billion or more every year, is available in these universal service funds?
Right.
How do you see a need for change in that regard, Sunne?
Thank you, Drew. And I'm going to be as brief as I can, because then I want to ask you
right.
to provide your answer and to give us advice in California. First and foremost, there's no substitute for leadership. And I often have sort of joked that the FCC and the Universal Services Fund is the biggest sandbox you can play in DC without any congressional oversight. I mean, Congress oversees the budget, but it is the FCC, 5 people appointed by the president, confirmed by the Senate, who actually decide how to use those billions of dollars every year. And it's hard to find a lot of transparency, I must say. So having said that, it takes the administration, a president with Congress, to say it is going to be the policy of this nation to get everyone online. And everyone online is, yes, all of rural America and all of low-income America. Because what we have seen in the pandemic is we've got digitally unserved and digitally underserved low-income households in urban areas that are never going to see the kind of investment in network upgrades to support distance learning, to support telehealth without a subsidy from the public sector. We need to obviously have continuing subsidies in rural America, but it should be with a lot of competition and a lot of performance standards. No ISP should be allowed to get a public fund, be it taxpayer dollars or ratepayer dollars, if they're not also going to have an affordable offer, if they're not also going to be a part of a solution, working in partnership with a state and regions in order to actually drive to that full deployment. No more cherry picking. More recently, I've been asked by the Council on Competitiveness, who's looking at what happens in the next administration, and they're really focused on broadband. We've done the analysis for them and said, what this nation is needing is $100 billion program. It is going to take that order of magnitude for both the infrastructure and the adoption to get everyone online. And that presupposes that states would be incented and rewarded for doing their piece of the puzzle. It presupposes that internet service providers would participate in a true public-private partnership, that there would be an operational, workable, universal lifeline program for high-speed internet service at the federal level to support what states might do. So that's the beginning. Now, the other thing that I really want to underscore and then get your input is, it also has to be the policy of the nation. If we're going to invest that kind of money, be it at the countrywide level, at a state level, then we also need to expect that broadband or digital equity is infused into every program. What does that mean? It means U.S. Department of Education doesn't provide a grant that isn't to a school or an organization that is actually getting not just the children, not just the students online, but their parents. It means that HHS says we're absolutely going to optimize the use of technology and everything. It goes on and on. So we integrate, we call that institutionalization of digital equity. So Drew, in the last minutes that are left, what is your advice to California?
Well, I don't think it's advice to California, but advice nationwide. And I have 3 points that I thought of, and perhaps I can do more. We've given a little more time. The first is let's adjust our speed definition. I mean, it's simply outrageous that we are still on the books with the 25.3. And what makes it worse, the Congress, when they did the Reconnect rural program, only mandated a 10.1 speed tier. Now, the administrative agency, the USDA, Department of Agriculture, did everything they could to kind of nudge that upward within the bounds of the law there. But this just goes to why we need to have a more ample definition of 100 down, 100 up type of broadband. And obviously that drives towards, without being, quote, technologically unneutral, that drives towards what we need to have. And again, I don't want to get into a fiber versus wireless fight. Those have happened for ages. I think what's happening now is you see a lot of convergence of the players, right? We've had convergence of devices and convergence of networks. That's what's happening, is that network convergence, where whether you start off as a wireless provider or a fiber provider, you're going to use the best technology mix in your middle mile and your last mile access networks. And so, we want to make sure we're driving fiber as absolutely far as we can into the neighborhoods. And that kind of ties into the second point I would offer, which is we need to have more allowance for competition, and that includes when a municipality or a region or a county wants to get involved. It's really unfortunate where you have a circumstance where communities want to and have great success with their municipal networks, or if not a municipal network, that's full scale and open access network. You referred at the top of the hour, Sunny, to the work of open access networks like Utopia Fiber. There are more that have come online since 10 years ago. And these networks, 10, 15 years ago, these networks are networks where you don't have to have a vertically integrated system where one person owns the infrastructure, operates the infrastructure, and operates services on it. Those are not naturally occurring functions. You can have one player, could be the municipality, that owns the infrastructure, another player who, under a contract, operates the infrastructure, and multiple providers who offer services. On the Utopia Fiber network, for example, there are 25 companies that offer internet service, and they work with this open network to have robust competition. So having that kind of competition, having a little bit out of the box thinking is maybe my second recommendation. My third would be, and this may be a little out of the box, but I think we should start to explore, certainly we should explore funding for infrastructure. I don't want to go against that. But this is for my Republican friends, if you're not going to get behind a significant $100 billion investment in infrastructure, which probably is a very good idea, but if you're not going to get behind that, you should at least consider tax credits for infrastructure. In other words, allow a person to write off the cost of a up to $3,000 connection for the fiber. Because again, you're seeing lots of innovative companies that are thinking through this in a different way. Instead of necessarily having to go to a provider who gives you broadband, you can own your own network. You can own your own network, and you do that by working with a provider who's willing to get that infrastructure, get that fiber to your home, and get the tax credit and allow the tax credit to be assignable. That's very crucial, so that I could then assign that tax credit to a company that wants to build that network that I own. So those are a couple ideas. I'll probably have to give some more thought on presenting them, refining them. But I'd love your reactions and also your thoughts. And we can't let this topic go. How the state and the state PUC and this California Advanced Service Fund is going to interact with federal investments in broadband, whether done through something like the Rural Digital Opportunity Fund, an auction that will take place on October 29th next month, less than 30 days from now, and what we can do to kind of make those potential conflicts a little smoother. Do you have thoughts on that, Sunne?
I do. First of all, congratulations on those three recommendations for the nation. I thought that they're very, very interesting. And I think you also embedded in that this notion of a lot of collaboration that has to happen, and also incentives. Again, it should not, I always think in terms of if the public side, being either taxes or ratepayer funds, are coming to the table, it is for an investment, not just a subsidy. And there has to be a two-way street in terms of rules. I should acknowledge that what we in California explicitly are doing under the leadership of Governor Gavin Newsom, who issued an executive order on broadband for all, has his Department of Technology doing a plan with all the state agencies, is to position to be able to be a partner with the federal government in anticipation of at whatever is done in the future, but also the auction that you talk about, aligning the funding from the California Advanced Services Fund to be able to support ISPs, others, well, and public, other applicants, public agencies, and tribal organizations who do succeed in that auction. So there is a recognition of the states, and our state needs to be ready to be a partner with the federal government. And that's an important aspect of this work. We are fortunate in California. We've got leaders that are statewide and regional that are aligned. The state turned to the California Forward organization to engage people statewide for public input. Tomorrow, one of our regional consortia, the consortium called Valley Vision, that has the broadband consortium for the Sacramento capital area, will roll out updated policies and model ordinances on what local governments and regional governments can do. So Trish Kelly has led all of that work. We've got our what are called metropolitan planning organizations. They're the transportation agencies, recognizing, as I used to say as Secretary of Business, Transportation, Housing, the best trip is a virtual trip. If I can unload a trip on the freeway and reduce the impact on the environment, that is a double win. And with the pandemic, we had the best air, no congestion on the 405, the 710, the 10. It was like, okay, we've just proven our case here that broadband is a green strategy. So in this era of being very concerned about climate change, broadband also is one of those strategies and mechanisms that will help us offset impacts on the environment as we go to a non-carbon fuel-based world. And so we've got great partnerships with the Southern California Association of Governments, and Martha Van Royen is leading an effort to literally quantify what are the reductions in vehicle miles traveled in greenhouse gas emissions. Now, I go into this because you asked. what about state leaders? What are we doing back up to work with the federal government or at a national level? And the point of this is, it always starts with the individuals, leaders in their own communities who work together in a region, have the support of the state to then align with national policy. That's how we get something done. And your work with Broadband Breakfast, only I thought you were going to serve actual food here. It's actually broadband lunch on the
breakfast for you though. So
right on the East Coast, but keep that up, Drew. And working with Shelby and John Winhausen, we need to have the forums at the federal level. If Shelby and the Council on Competitiveness and your work on getting a spotlight on all of this came together and said, these are our policies we recommend to Congress and the new administration or the next administration, we can get something done. And that's what excites us here.
Well, and one final thought for both of us is that it's been at least 4 presidential cycles that I've been focused on broadband. And I do remember distinctly in the 2004 race thinking, what is so fascinating about this is it involves so many elements. This is not an issue that can be compartmentalized, shoehorns. There's federal, there's state, there's international, there's global, there's infrastructure, there's use, there's adoption. There's so many issues. And what a great pleasure to have you on this call to speak to the California Emerging Technology Fund and the very important role that you in California have had. Thank you so much, Sunne, for being on this with us. And I want to just in conclusion invite all of our followers to return again next week, October 7th. We'll have another Champions of Broadband. And then on October 14th, we are going to go to a no-nonsense guide to 5G, a 5-part series that's going to focus on both the realities and the hype behind 5G and what it means for our country. I'm Drew Clark, broadbandbreakfast.com. Please join us and visit again next Wednesday at 12 noon Eastern Time. Thank you. Take care.